The getaway. The hum of the highway lulled her into a drowsy comfort, broken only by the crackle of the radio and the steady rhythm of tires against asphalt. Amelia pressed her forehead lightly against the cool glass of the passenger window, watching the pine trees thicken as they climbed higher into the mountains. The sun hung low in the sky, throwing long, golden beams across the road, painting everything in warm autumn hues. It should have felt perfect, like something out of a dream, and in many ways it did. Her boyfriend, Chris, grinned behind the wheel, one hand loosely gripping the steering wheel, the other resting on the gear shift. His sunglasses caught the glint of sunlight, reflecting little golden sparks as he leaned forward slightly, focused on the winding mountain road. "You doing okay?" he asked, his voice carrying over the hum of the engine. "Yeah," Amelia said, smiling faintly. "I still can't believe you planned this. A whole weekend. Just us." Chris chuckled, giving her a quick glance. "You deserve it. Classes have been eating you alive. And besides," his lips quirked into a smirk, "I wanted you all to myself for a while." Her cheeks warmed, and she looked back out the window, hoping the flush wasn't too obvious. She had never really done something like this before, just getting away, no schedule, no parents, no roommate, no safety net of friends. Just her and Chris. A part of her felt nervous, but mostly it was excitement and adventure. The road narrowed as they wound deeper into the forest, sunlight filtering through thick green pines. At times, it felt like the trees swallowed the road whole, their shadows pressing in, branches arching together overhead like skeletal fingers. Amelia told herself it was beautiful, that this was exactly the kind of escape she needed. But sometimes in the hush between Chris's jokes or the radio static, the silence of the forest felt heavier than it should. They stopped once at a gas station near the last town they passed, a shabby place with peeling paint and flickering fluorescent lights. Chris filled the tank, while Amelia wandered inside to grab snacks. The clerk, an older man with a face lined like tree bark, gave her a strange look when she mentioned where they were headed. "Cabin out there?" he asked, his voice low, wary. "Yeah," Amelia said, smiling awkwardly. "Just a weekend trip. My boyfriend's been planning it." The man frowned, chewing his lip before finally muttering, "Careful out there. Roads get lonely. Folks get turned around." She nodded politely, a little unsettled, and rejoined Chris without mentioning it. When she glanced back to the window as they pulled out, the clerk was still watching them. By the time they reached the turnoff, the sun had dipped low, smearing streaks of pink and orange across the sky. Chris slowed the car, guiding it onto a gravel path half hidden by weeds and branches. The crunch of stones under the tires echoed unnaturally loud in the gathering quiet. The cabin appeared suddenly, tucked between tall pines like it had grown there rather than been built. Its roof sagged slightly, and the logs were dark with age, moss creeping up the sides. Smoke curled faintly from a stone chimney, though Chris hadn't mentioned anyone being there ahead of them. Amelia's breath caught. It looked eerie, like the kind of place you'd see in an old photograph, or the background of a story you weren't sure was true. Chris killed the engine and leaned back with a satisfied sigh. "What do you think?" Amelia forced a smile. "It's definitely secluded." He laughed, grabbing their bags from the back. "That's the point. No neighbors, no noise, no stress." Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and pine sap, with an undertone of something older, harder to place, like damp stone or earth. A stone fireplace dominated the main room, its hearth piled with ashes from old fires. Animal skulls and antlers decorated the walls, their shadows stretching long in the fading light. Amelia shivered but told herself it was just rustic charm. Chris busied himself lighting candles. There was no electricity, and setting their food on the table. He moved with easy confidence, like he had been here before, though he hadn't said so. Amelia trailed her fingers along the rough wooden walls, pausing when she noticed faint markings carved into the beams. Circles, triangles, crude stick-like figures. She leaned closer, frowning. "What's this?" she asked. Chris glanced over, expression unreadable for a beat too long, before he smiled. "Old carvings. People used to do that kind of thing up here. Don't worry about it. His smile was reassuring, but something in the way his eyes lingered on her made her skin prickle. She let go, forcing herself to laugh when he pulled her into a hug, his warmth pushing the unease back down. That night, after a simple dinner by candlelight, they sat together by the fireplace. The flames flickered, painting the room in warm gold, their shadows stretching across the walls. Chris's arm draped around her shoulders, his voice low as he told her stories from when he was a kid. Fishing trips, pranks, the kind of reckless adventures she could picture him doing. It was easy to sink into the moment, to forget the strange carvings, the watching clerk, the way the forest had swallowed the light so quickly. She felt safe against his side, lulled by the crackle of the fire and the rhythm of his words. But later, when she finally lay in the small creaky bed tucked into the corner of the cabin, unease returned. The fire had died down, leaving only faint embers glowing in the dark. Chris lay beside her, his breathing deep, steady, sleeping. Or so she thought. Somewhere outside in the hush of the night, a sound rose, a low murmur, almost like someone whispering. Amelia froze, straining to listen. At first, she thought it was the wind weaving through the trees. But then she realized the voice was too steady, too deliberate. It was coming from outside, and it sounded like Chris's voice. Her heart thudded, but she told herself she was imagining it. Maybe he had gotten up. Maybe he was just outside. She shifted slightly, glancing toward the side of the bed. Empty. The sheets were still warm where he'd been lying. Amelia lay rigid in the dark, the whispers drifting through the cracks in the walls. Strange syllables, harsh and sharp, like no language she recognized. Her chest tightened as she pulled the blanket closer, every instinct telling her not to move, not to look out the window. When the whispers stopped, the silence was worse. The bed creaked suddenly as Chris slid back under the covers, his movements deliberate, quiet. She kept her eyes shut, her breathing shallow. He smelled faintly of smoke and damp earth. His arm curled around her waist, pulling her close. "Sleep," he murmured, his breath hot against her ear. Her pulse hammered. She didn't answer, didn't move, just kept her body slack, feigning sleep until finally, mercifully, exhaustion dragged her under. But even in dreams, the whispers followed. Whispers in the night. Amelia woke to the sound of birds calling from somewhere deep in the forest. Pale gray light filtered through the gaps in the shutters, faint and cold compared to the warm glow of last night's fire. For a moment, she thought maybe the whispers had been a dream, some half-formed nightmare stirred by her nerves. Chris was already awake, stoking the fire, his back to her. He moved deliberately, his shoulders stiff, almost mechanical in their rhythm. When he noticed her watching, his posture softened. He turned, smiling with that familiar boyish grin, the one that had made her trust him in the first place. "Morning, sleepyhead," he said. "Hungry?" She nodded, though her stomach felt knotted. Breakfast was simple, scrambled eggs and toast cooked over fire. The taste was fine, comforting even, but Amelia's eyes kept drifting to Chris. He was cheerful, maybe too cheerful, as if rehearsing normalcy. His hand, she noticed, bore faint smudges of dirt beneath the nails. When she asked, he laughed it off. "Firewood," he said. "Went out early to grab more while you slept." It was a good explanation. Believable. But she couldn't shake the memory of his voice in the night. The strange syllables carried on the air like a spell. After breakfast, they stepped outside. The morning air was crisp, biting, the forest damp with dew. Pines loomed all around, their trunks rising like endless pillars. The cabin sat in a small clearing. But even here, Amelia felt hemmed in, as though the forest leaned closer with every breath. Chris suggested a walk, and she agreed, though unease settled heavier with every step. They followed a faint trail winding through the trees, the ground soft with pine needles. Birds flitted overhead, and the distant rush of water suggested a stream nearby. "See," Chris said, reaching back to squeeze her hand. "No stress, no noise, just us." She forced a smile, trying to match his enthusiasm. But the forest wasn't silent in the way she expected. Beneath the rustle of branches and the occasional bird call, there was something else, an undertone, like faint humming just beyond hearing. Every time she turned to listen, it was gone. They reached the stream, its water clear and cold, tumbling over smooth stones. Chris knelt to drink, cup in his hands, while Amelia lingered on the bank. Across the water, carved into the bark of a massive pine, she saw a strange mark. It was a circle, rough and jagged, with a vertical line running through its center. Smaller lines branched outward like crude rays of sunlight. Her stomach clenched. It was the same symbol she had seen carved into the beams inside the cabin. "Chris," she called softly. "What is this?" He glanced up, his expression shadowed for a beat before he smiled again. "Old markings. Don't worry about it. Just part of the history out here." She wanted to press further, but something in his tone warned her not to. Back at the cabin, the days stretched in uneasy silence. They played cards, made sandwiches, and tried to pretend the isolation was romantic. But every so often, Chris drifted into silence, his gaze distant, his lips moving slightly, as though rehearsing words under his breath. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Amelia noticed him growing restless. He paced the cabin, glancing toward the windows, then back at her. "What's wrong?" she asked finally. "Nothing," he said too quickly. "Just can't wait for tonight. The stars out here are incredible. You'll see." There was something hungry in his eyes when he said it. That night, she lay awake again listening. Chris's breathing slowed beside her, and for a while she thought maybe he'd truly fallen asleep. But then the mattress shifted. Her pulse spiked as he slid out of bed, moving quietly, careful not to disturb her. The door creaked softly as he stepped outside. Amelia's heart raced. She waited a full minute, then rose silently, pulling on her sweater. Barefoot, she crept to the window, careful to stay hidden behind the curtain's edge. Moonlight spilled across the clearing. Chris stood a few yards from the cabin, his face tilted toward the sky. His lips moved, whispering again in that strange, guttural language. But this time, she heard something answer. It came from the forest, low, mournful, like the sound of wind pushing through hollow logs. A chorus of whispers that weren't quite words, echoing back to him. Amelia's breath caught. Chris lifted his arms slowly, palms open toward the trees. His body seemed to tremble, his shadow stretching unnaturally long in the moonlight. For a moment his form looked distorted, his spine bending too far, his shoulders bulging as though something beneath the skin strained to break free. The forest fell silent again. Chris lowered his arms, his chest heaving. Slowly, he turned back toward the cabin. Amelia darted from the window, scrambling back into bed. She forced her breathing to steady just as the door creaked open. Chris returned quietly, sliding under the covers. His skin was cold, damp with sweat, but his breathing soon slowed again. Amelia stared at the ceiling, wide-eyed, her pulse pounding. Whatever was happening, it wasn't just in her head, and she was trapped, miles from help, alone in the woods with him, the monster within. The following morning, Amelia pretended to sleep long after Chris had risen. She listened as he moved about the cabin, muttering softly to himself. The words were too quiet to catch, but the cadence of them made her skin crawl. Those same guttural whispers, laced with an almost reverent tone. When she finally stirred, Chris turned quickly, smiling too wide, as though he'd been caught doing something forbidden. "Morning," he said. "Thought I'd let you rest." He moved toward her, brushing a kiss across her forehead. His lips felt icy. Amelia forced herself to smile, though fear roiled in her stomach. "What were you doing?" she asked carefully. "Nothing," he said. Too fast, too defensive, just cleaning up, chopping wood. But his hands bore no splinters, no dirt, only faint scratches that looked almost like claw marks running across the veins of his forearms. The day passed under a veil of tension. Amelia found herself watching him constantly, looking for cracks in his facade, and she found them small but terrifying. The way his eyes lingered on her when he thought she wasn't looking. The way his reflection in the cabin's narrow mirror seemed to beat too slow, his head turning a fraction later than his body. The way his appetite grew ravenous, chewing through food like he hadn't eaten in days. By late afternoon, Amelia's nerves were frayed. She suggested a walk to clear her head, and to her surprise, Chris agreed. They followed the trail back to the stream, but this time, Chris didn't kneel to drink. He stood at the edge, staring into the water. "Do you hear it?" he asked suddenly, his voice low. Amelia stiffened. "Hear what?" "The water," he murmured. "It doesn't just flow. It speaks. They've been here longer than us, longer than anyone. The forest remembers." He turned then, and for a fleeting moment, she saw something flicker across his face. His pupils had dilated until they nearly swallowed the irises, leaving only thin rings of blue. Her breath caught. She took a step back, but Chris's expression smoothed over. He smiled again, softer now, as if embarrassed. "Sorry, I'm rambling," he said, reaching for her hand. His touch burned cold. That night, Amelia couldn't bring herself to sleep. Chris lay beside her, unnaturally still. Not a twitch, not a sigh, just a rigid silence that pressed against her nerves like ice water. At some point, she drifted into a half-dreaming state, but a noise snapped her awake. A scraping sound, a dragging, as if something heavy moved across the wooden floor. Slowly, she turned her head. Chris was gone. The door stood slightly ajar, a sliver of moonlight spilling in. Her pulse thundered. She slipped out of bed, every movement deliberate, and crept toward the window. What she saw outside rooted her to the spot. Chris stood in the clearing, shirtless, his skin pale under the moon. His chest heaved with heavy breaths. Around him, carved into dirt, was a circle, large and jagged, mirroring the symbol she'd seen etched into the cabin in trees. He knelt suddenly, pressing both hands into the soil. His body shuddered violently. Then his back arched, his spine cracking audibly in the night air. Amelia's hand flew to her mouth. Chris let out a guttural sound, halfway between a moan and a growl. His shoulders bulged unnaturally, his arms trembling as if they could no longer contain what writhed beneath the skin. For a terrible instant, she thought his bones might split her out of him. From the trees came an answer, low, mournful whispers, echoing like a chorus of ancient voices. The shadows between the pines deepened, pulsing as though alive. Chris turned his head toward them, his mouth stretched too wide, his teeth glinting sharp in the moonlight. Amelia stumbled backward, her heels striking the floorboard with a creak. Chris froze. His head snapped toward the cabin. Their eyes met through the window. His expression was no longer Chris. His face was something else, something hungry, ancient, twisted into a smile that chilled her marrow. The door slammed open. Amelia bolted, racing back toward the bed. Her breath came ragged, her heart hammering as Chris stepped inside. His body looked wrong, hunched slightly, as though his limbs didn't fit the way they should. His eyes glowed faintly in the dim cabin light. "You saw," he said softly, not accusing, almost tender. Amelia swallowed hard. "Chris, what's happening to you?" He tilted his head, studying her. Then he smiled again, the boy she'd first met in class, the one who'd asked her out for coffee. "I want to protect you from it," he whispered, "but you've always been curious. That's why I love you." He stepped closer. She backed away until her legs struck the bed frame. "Chris, you're scaring me," she said, her voice shaking. "Don't be scared," he replied. "It's just part of me now, part of us." He reached for her, his hand trembling, the skin shifting faintly as though something beneath it clawed for release. Amelia forced herself to act. She shoved him hard, darting past him toward the door. For a moment, she thought she'd made it, her bare feet striking the cold earth, the trees beckoning her into their cover. But behind her came the sound of pursuit, heavy, uneven footsteps pounding against the ground. And then the growl, low, guttural, inhuman. The forest swallowed her, branches clawing at her arms, shadows closing in on every side. She didn't look back. She couldn't, because whatever chased her through the woods wasn't Chris anymore. The last chase, the forest swallowed Amelia whole. Every branch felt alive, reaching, clawing at her hair, scratching down her arms like skeletal fingers desperate to keep her from escaping. Her breath came ragged, hot clouds bursting into the freezing air. Behind her, the forest roared with sound, the thundering footsteps, the snapping of trees, and that guttural growl that no longer belonged to Chris. It was deeper, animalistic, a sound that carried not just through her ears but through her bones. She forced her legs faster, the damp earth squelching under her bare feet. The cabin light flickered faintly behind her, swallowed quickly by the dark. Run. Just run. But no matter how far she went, the forest seemed endless, a twisting maze of shadows and whispers. She stumbled into a clearing, nearly collapsing. Moonlight poured through the opening above, and with it came a terrible sight. Carvings, dozens of them, etched into the soil in perfect concentric circles. Symbols like the ones she had seen in the cabin. Claw-like, ancient, seared into the earth itself. At the center stood a crude stone altar, blackened by fire and stained with something too dark to be dirt. Her stomach lurched. The whispering began again, louder this time, not just in her ears but in her skull, pressing into her thoughts. She clamped her hands against her head, crying out, but the voices slithered between her fingers like smoke. "We see you. We see you. Ours. Ours. No!" she screamed, stumbling backward. But before she could turn, something burst from the trees. Chris, or what was left of him. His body was twisted, hunched, the skin stretched taut and gray beneath the moonlight. His eyes gleamed with a pale fire, his teeth sharp enough to glint. His jaw seemed too wide, his hands too long, claws flexing against the dirt. Yet in his expression, buried deep within that monstrous face, Amelia still caught glimpses of the boy she'd loved. "Amelia!" he rasped, his voice distorted, layered with something inhuman. "You don't understand. This is freedom." She backed toward the altar, tears streaking her cheeks. "Chris, please, you're scaring me. You don't have to do this." He stepped closer, tilting his head like a predator curious about its prey. "It's not me anymore," he said. "It's us. The forest chose me. It chose you, too." And in that instant, she realized this wasn't some random possession. Chris had wanted this. He'd sought it out, embraced it, brought her here not as a victim, but as a partner. Her stomach twisted with horror. "No," she whispered. "I didn't choose this. I'll never choose this." His face darkened. The growl rose from deep in his chest, vibrating to the clearing like thunder. Amelia acted on instinct. She grabbed a jagged rock from the ground and swung it. The edge caught him across the jaw, not enough to stop him, but enough to startle. He roared, rearing back, his clawed hand swiping through the air where her head had been seconds before. She darted around the altar, her body trembling with adrenaline. The whispers grew louder, angry now. "Stop her. Stop her. She belongs to us." Her eyes darted to the altar. Something sharp gleamed in the moonlight, a rusted ceremonial dagger, half buried in the stone surface. She didn't think. She just lunged, fingers closing around the hilt. She yanked it free. The blade felt unnaturally cold, humming faintly in her grip. Chris froze, his monstrous form twitching as his glowing eyes locked onto the weapon. "You don't know what that is," he snarled. But Amelia did. Somehow she did. The whispers recoiled, hissing, as if the dagger's presence cut through them. She raised it, her hand shaking but firm. "Stay back." For a heartbeat, they just stared at each other. Amelia's chest heaved, tears burning in her eyes. Chris's monstrous form loomed, his claws twitching, his breathing ragged. And then he charged. She screamed, thrusting the blade forward. The steel sank deep into his chest, and for an instant, time froze. Chris's eyes widened, not with rage, but with something almost human. Sadness. He reached for her face, his clawed hand trembling as though he wanted to touch her one last time. His lips moved soundlessly before a guttural cry ripped from his throat. His body convulsed violently. The whispers shattered into a deafening chorus, screaming in rage. "No, no, ours, ours." Light burst from the wound, searing white, so bright Amelia shielded her eyes. Chris's body twisted, dissolving into smoke and shadow that writhed like living things before being ripped into the sky. Then silence. Amelia collapsed to her knees, gasping for air. The dagger clattered beside her. The clearing was still again, the forest quiet, as though nothing had ever happened. But the altar remained. The carvings remained, and the dagger, faintly humming, remained. Amelia forced herself to stand, her legs trembling. She stumbled back through the trees, desperate to escape the cursed clearing, desperate to leave the nightmare behind. But as the cabin came into view, glowing faintly under the moonlight, she froze. The door stood open. Inside, everything was exactly as it had been: the bed, the table, the mirror, except for one thing. On the wooden wall above the bed, carved deep into the grain, was a new symbol, the same one she'd seen in the clearing. Only this time, beneath it, a single word had been scrawled in fresh, jagged letters. Amelia, her blood turned to ice. She didn't go back inside. She didn't even think. She ran past the cabin, past the road, past everything, until she saw the faint orange glow of sunrise on the horizon. When she finally made it back to town, barefoot and bloodied, she tried to explain. No one believed her. Not about the monster. Not about Chris. But Amelia knew, because sometimes, in the quiet moments, when she was alone and the night pressing too close, she still heard the whispers. Hours, hours, hours.